Everyone, welcome to our class this morning. We're in the book of Ruth, which is a love story. One of the reoccurring words in Ruth that we've talked about along the way is the Hebrew word hesed, which is a word for steadfast love. This is the love that God had for Boaz and Ruth and Naomi and for you and for me. And then that kind of love was evidenced in their relationships with one another. God is love, and we get our ability and motivation and intent and instruction about love from God. So let's turn to number 140. Number 140. Hesed, love divine. I don't know if I've heard this song sung lately. 140. Pure, unbounded love. Love divine, all love excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down, fixing us by humble dwelling, all our faithful mercies crown. Jesus, thou art all compassion, pure unbounded love thou art. Visit us with thy salvation, enter every trembling heart. I believe that's the message we want to communicate today. We are in the book of Ruth, and we are now caught up after catching up from a snow day. We're caught up to the correct date, March the 1st. So today we are doing the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verses 6 through 18. This is one of the longer sections of text that we're doing in this study through the book of Ruth. And we'll do the text, and then we go back and do topics. So here are some of the topics that will be introduced in this text that we'll be looking at going forward. We'll talk about eating and drinking, feasts, that kind of thing. A phrase that's used in the Bible, uncovering feet. It seems to be a courting sort of activity. And then to spread one's wings or to come under another's wings. That again is a phrase that finds itself throughout Scripture in different contexts. We're going to be talking about making mature choices. We have Boaz and Ruth, and they both are mature people, not just in chronological age, but in their character, in their spirituality. They make some mature choices. We'll be talking about that. There is the line, do not fear. How often does that line show up in Scripture? It shows up in the book of Ruth. Then we'll talk about, we'll do this one together, social constraints and appearances' sake. There is a picture that we put before other people, and we make some choices because of appearances' sake. We read the room and consider the culture and make regard to social constraints. So we'll talk about that some. Then generous provision, which we've already run to in Ruth and will continue to do so. And then wait and rest. We've been talking about rest some. That word gets used in the book of Ruth. But as people who are following the will of the Lord, sometimes we have to wait and rest and let the Lord do his will, fulfill his will. So that's our text and topics for today. So let's begin in Ruth chapter 3, and we're doing verses 6 through 18. Verse 6 says, "So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her." We're going to use that kickoff verse number 6 in Ruth 3 to do a bit of a review of what we're doing each week with the text. We're advancing the story of Ruth and Boaz. Up to this point, Ruth, being a Moabitess, but living in Judah, being there because of the vow that she made to her mother-in-law Naomi, who is a Jewess, to be with her and to cling to her, to fulfill needs that Naomi couldn't fulfill herself, as they're both widowed women without means of support. So they're sticking together, and Ruth, as the younger woman, is able to do some physical things that perhaps Naomi couldn't do, fulfill some emotional places that Naomi would need fulfilling. So Ruth, a foreigner, is with Naomi in Judah, and the way that the migrants and the poor supplied their food in harvest times was by the commandment of the Lord. This was written in the law. Those who owned the field, when they harvested the field, were supposed to leave the corners unharvested, and they were also not to go back and repick. So those who were poor and those who were migrants, those who are the withouts, then would go to this farmer's field, and they were, by law, free to harvest the corners and the unharvested areas, the leftover, unpicked, the previously picked areas of the field. So that's what Ruth has been doing. And she came upon the field that was owned by Boaz, whom she found was appreciative of her work ethic and her loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi, and how Ruth went about things, the love that Ruth had for Naomi and was caring for her. Boaz had made sure that Ruth was protected in his fields, and even threw a little harvesting favor her way, so that she would always go home with a full sack. He had been doing that sort of thing. And then we have just read recently that Boaz, Naomi knows this, Ruth didn't have any idea, but Boaz was kin to Naomi's deceased husband, which puts him in the position of being what the Hebrews called a kinsman redeemer. And that is, if a female was married and her husband died and she didn't have any male children to take care of her, then under normal circumstances, if there was a brother to the man that had died, he would take that female in as a wife. They would bear children, but the child would be regarded not as the biological father, but would be the son of the deceased, in order that the inheritances that were supposed to follow that line could continue to be followed, and that descendancy and progeny, that all could be kept intact. That was a part of the law that God gave, Deuteronomy 25, and it also was, we understand, the custom in the areas that were around. Well, it turns out that Boaz, Naomi recognizes, is in line as a kinsman redeemer. Now, that Levirate marriage thing, it is in the law, and it was there for the protection of widows, what the New Testament calls a widow indeed, that is, a widow without children. So she really is without anybody in the world. The law was there for the protection of that woman, and also because the Jewish people were so obsessive about inheritance lines, it also was a way to carry on, as we mentioned, the inheritance line of the deceased. But we can't imagine that that's one of those laws that wasn't always observed. Just because it was on the books doesn't mean that it was always observed in the way that it was supposed to be observed. But Naomi is looking at things. She and Ruth are struggling without any means of support except for this harvest gleaning that Ruth is able to do. But here is a man who already has shown that he's a nice man, he's kind, a worthy man is what he's described. We've talked about that. We'll run into that worthy word again in today's text. And so she says, well, I know that he is a relative of my deceased husband and therefore a relative of Ruth's deceased husband. And so we're going to motivate him, I think is kind of the way to think about it, to take up the task of being the kinsman redeemer. So, a plan has been hatched. It is, Ruth has been gleaning in the fields. Now it's a little past harvest time. And what's going on with the farmers is it is winnowing time, separating the husk from the barley product, the barley fruit and the wheat fruit, separating the husks so that it can be used and sold. So it's threshing time, winnowing time as they call it. And that was always a celebrative time. It was hard work. It was all day work. It was pretty hot work. But it also was a time when you were able to lay out all that had been harvested and you were preparing it for market. So it was just one of those times when people came together. All of your workers came. Sometimes the community was involved, and you would thresh the wheat, and so you would build in good meals, and people would just make the best out of the hard work by having fun with it. And at night they would rest, but also do some relaxing and some celebration of the hard work that had been done that day. And so knowing that that's going on with Boaz and all of his workers, and Ruth had been treated as one of his servant girls in the fields, and Naomi sends Ruth to the threshing floor where Boaz and all of his people and others are threshing out the wheat. And what she told him last week was that for Ruth just kind of hang around, maybe be invisible during the day, but at the end of the day, and this is verse 3 of last week in chapter 3, when Boaz has finished eating and drinking, and when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. And Naomi says, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Ruth had said, all that you say I will do. So now we've got our verse 6, which is, Ruth went there, and she did as her mother-in-law commanded her. Kind of. So Ruth, as it turns out, we had a topic earlier that was called bold moves, and Ruth takes a bold move. You know, she was told, just do that, and then Boaz will tell you what to do. Well, we're going to get into our study, and Ruth is going to do what her mother-in-law says, and then say to Boaz, here's what I would like for you to do. So she takes that initiative. In relationships, there are withdrawers and pursuers, and very likely in your own relationships, your own marital relationship, in your courting, there's a pursuer, and there is the person who's not the pursuer, but they are the receptor. So that's the way that a lot of relationships work. Somebody takes initiative, and the other person, while they would never have taken initiative or appreciative of it. So we have that sort of relationship that's building here with Ruth and Boaz. So now let's get to verse 7. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she, Ruth, came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. I'm going to repeat some stuff that I said last week when this plan was being hatched. And that is that if we were a suspicious people, we might think, that sounds kind of sketchy. We got some drinking going on, and we got this woman softly coming to this man and laying down beside him. It all seems kind of sketchy. So what we have determined, because this is true to the text, we're looking at the text, true to this text and what came before and what comes after. Boaz and Ruth are both people of high integrity, and they've demonstrated that in everything that they've done. In the way that Ruth was loyal to Naomi, in the way that Boaz was apparently a good boss to his harvesters, and even was kind and generous to the poor. Ruth and Boaz both had shown that they're not of low character. They don't do base behaviors. So what we have here is this description of Boaz and Ruth, and him at the end of a hard day's work, eating and drinking, and then going to lie down to rest. And Ruth, as she was instructed by Naomi, because Naomi knows she's the older woman teaching the younger woman, and was telling her just what to do and how to handle this situation. She had said, observe where Boaz goes to lie down, and after he's there and relaxed and asleep, then you go and you uncover his feet and lie there by his feet. And what Naomi said was, then when he discovers that, he'll tell you what to do. That's where we're going to have diverge a little bit from Naomi's plan, but that is the situation. So, that being the case, Boaz being who Boaz is, Ruth being who Ruth is, and us being who we are, people who believe the best, then we are assuming, we're recognizing that there are some cultural appropriations that are going on here, but nothing inappropriate in any sort of way. It may be bold, and it may be a little risky, and it does involve intimate emotions, but everything that Boaz and Ruth are doing, we trust is above board. I mentioned last week that every time that I study the book of Ruth, I think that I'm going to get some commentary that will explain phrases like uncovering feet and spreading wings, you know those kinds of phrases. And I think I'm going to get some really great historical background on those phrases that will tell just how in the old Jewish world and in the Middle East of that area, how just all what that involved and how frequent. And then, as a matter of fact, when you pull out the commentaries, what the commentaries say is, oh, we don't know much about this. We don't find this. We don't find these phrases really cropping up in stories that we can tell exactly what is intended and what's going on. So we read it, and we are reading. And by the way, the Bible does have place to place tender and intimate love stories, beginning in Genesis with the man and the woman becoming one, Song of Solomon, which goes the deepest of any book into that sort of thing. But we have the Boaz and Ruth story. So just be satisfied that what Ruth is doing is appropriate, that Boaz is going to respond in an appropriate way as a man of God and as a woman of God. Because though she was a Moabitess, Ruth had said to Naomi, your God will be my God. And she's been learning Jehovah's ways. So though we may be tempted to look sideways at what's going on here, we can believe the best. And that is deserved by Boaz and by Ruth. So now we're picking up at, let me do one more thing in that. One reason we might think about those things, we have that phrase twice now. We had it at the end of last week's lesson. Naomi said, uncover his feet. Here we're told Ruth uncovered his feet. One reason we might be tempted to think in less than high-standing ways about that is because the Bible does, again and again and again, use the phrase uncovering another person's nakedness. And that is sketchy when that happens. That is a God-forbidden thing. In the book of Luke, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18, there's a whole list. By the way, we're about to have a sexual ethics seminar, March the 15th. We have a sexual ethics expert and studied in that field. He's coming March the 15th. He'll be teaching this class on that day and also preaching. And then in the afternoon, he'll do a 1 o'clock session and a 4 o'clock session. One of the things that you need to know is we would like for people to enjoy Sunday school and the sermon and then be here for 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. We realize that's a fast turnaround. So there will be pizza and salad and MC, so you don't have to leave campus and try to get back. But you need to register for that so that we know what's going to happen. So online, there is on the Levy Facebook page in the private group that we have. There is a place where you just that information is given. You just type in your name, or if you're not that kind of person, then at Levy Central there's a list that's got a place for your name, and all we need is your name. We just need to know that you're coming. So we got this sexual ethics thing going. Well, in Leviticus and chapter 18, the phrase "uncover another's nakedness" is a phrase that gets used over and over and over about unethical sexual behavior. But that's uncovering a nakedness. This is different. It's uncovering feet, which is a different thing. So that may be one reason we first think about, we don't want to mix our phrases there about what's going on. So then, verses 8 and 9. At midnight, in the middle of the night, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." So, again, we want to make sure we get the picture. Boaz had worked hard all day. He had had his good supper, and he had had some drink, and he was relaxed and tired. We're told that he had gone to the edge of the grain. He didn't go home. This was late night work and early morning work generally in those times and places, and still in those places. A lot of times the farmer lived in town, but had a farm outside of town. That seems to be Boaz's situation. So during threshing, you need to get that threshing done. So during threshing, you just stay out at the farm, stay on the threshing floor, and sleep there. Work late, get up early. Well, Boaz, we're told, had gone to the edge of the grain, and maybe part of the picture is with all of the people that are around for threshing, all the workers that are around, all the celebrative nature of things going on. It's a happy time. It's kind of a party time for this harvest. And we don't know what goes on at the party, but Boaz is just one of those people who says, well, time for me to leave the party, and I'm going to go over here to this quieter place. And I'm going to lie down here and get the sleep that I need to get. So he had done that, and Naomi had instructed Ruth, you watch. When he does that, you go see where he lies down, so that after he falls asleep, you can go uncover his feet and lay there beside him. So she had done that, and sometime during the night, something startled Boaz. It might have been the fact he got this sense something was at his feet. So, but she had uncovered his feet. Maybe he got cold, but something startled him. And as he woke, and you've had those sensations where you wake up in the middle of the night and you might be a little bit disoriented and it's dark, and he just knows there's this person that's has invaded his space, if we want to think about it that way. And so he says, "Who are you?" And she identifies herself. She said, "This is Ruth." And she said, and this is quite interesting, you have to do some Hebrew work to know this. I don't know Hebrew, but I can do Hebrew work. So she said, "I am Ruth, your servant." Well, back in chapter 2 and verse 13, Ruth had said this to Boaz when she was working in his field. "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I'm not one of your servants." And her point was there, well, servant is a humble position. You've spoken kindly to your servant, though I'm not one of your workers, not one of your employees, but even I am working in your field. So you've been kind to your servant, and this is the menial laborer sort of thing. But that's not the word. What the word that Ruth used to say, "I'm your servant," in chapter 2 is not the word that she uses here. When she says, "I am your servant," that's a word that is frequently used in Scripture as someone who is a concubine or a wife of another. And so so what she's doing is she's upping the level of who she is. He asks, "Who are you?" She's upping I'm not just a servant in your field. I am a woman to whom you are a near relative and a redeemer. And she doesn't say, turn to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 25 and read that Levirate marriage law. She doesn't do that, but Boaz certainly is picking up on the language of what she's saying about, "And you are a redeemer." So she says, "So cover me with your wings, spread your wings over your servant." That's a really nice phrase that has to do with protection and provision, and it gets used in our relationship with God a good many times. Look at Psalm 91. Let's start with verse 3 to get a little context. Here's God who will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. So God is a protector. Verse 4 says, "He will cover you with his pinions." Y'all know what a pinion is? There's that song, again, not frequently sung here, but "Night with ebb and pinion, brooded o'er the vale." A pinion is a wing, in this an appendage, and so God then spreads his wings. He reaches out his arms over us in rescue and provision and in protection. And so in verse 4, this is still 91 of Psalms, "He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler." So God is our protector. He's our provider. He's our rescuer. He's the one in whom, under his wings, we find safety and needs filled. And so then, and that occurred, we just did Psalm 91, but you'll remember that gets used throughout Scripture in different ways. And so here is Ruth saying, "So spread your wings." Now, here's another thing. Look back at Ruth chapter 2 and verse 12. That's the verse right before Ruth had used those servant words about being a farm harvester. This is Ruth chapter 2 and verse 12. And listen to what Boaz Um, this is, let's see, this is what Boaz is telling Ruth at this point. The Lord repay you for what you have done. And what she had done was be faithful and loyal to Naomi and take care of Naomi. And the reason she's working in his field is in order to supply food for herself and Naomi. So he says, the Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel. And then there's that next phrase, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. She's a Moabitess, and so doesn't naturally belong under the wings of God like all the Jewish people do. But she has come to find refuge there. She has come, like Naomi, empty, without husband, without child, without means of support, with grief and tragedy already in her life. But she's come to Bethlehem, and what she is looking for is some sort of safe, secure life that would be available under the protection and provision of God. And so back in chapter 2 and verse 2, Boaz had said, the Lord take you under his wing and fulfill all your needs and take care of you and give you protection. And so what we have now in Ruth chapter 3 is Ruth says, and you are a close relative and in the redeeming line as a redeemer, and you can fulfill that blessing you wished upon me for God to take me under his wing and take care of me. You can be the way that God fulfills that by taking me under your wing. And then that's the way that God will fulfill the blessing that you blessed upon me. You know, you've perhaps been in a situation sometime where there was something that needed to be done, that you saw a need somewhere that needed to be fulfilled, and you said, Lord, please fulfill that need. And then later on you found out you're the answer to your own prayer. So you're the one who has to take that up and do that, and see that it gets done. So God answers the prayer, and he does it through you. Well, that's kind of what's going on here. So here is then, in verse 10, here is how Boaz responds. And remember, we have people of integrity, people who of good behavior, who are handling things right. And by the way, Boaz, when we think about Boaz, he is very much a man of the law. Why was he kind to his employees? Because the law said you were supposed to do that. Why did he leave the corners of his field unharvested? Because the law said to do that. Why did he leave the body of his field? Why did he only pick through that one time and not touch? Well, because the law says that that's the way you're supposed to do it. Do y'all think every farmer did it that way? I don't. But Boaz was a man of the law, and that's what he had done. And now Ruth comes to him, and there is a law about this Levirate marriage and the redeeming kinsman, and she has thrown that up to him, and he's a man of the law, so this is what he says in verse 10. May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first. So let's think about the first kindness. The first kindness was what we just read back there in Ruth 2:2, where he had blessed her because she had been loyal to Naomi. Well, now he says, you have demonstrated an even greater kindness. And he says this about that kindness. He says, you've made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after younger men, neither poor nor rich. So again, Boaz being a man of the law. You know, we just said you're supposed to leave your field with some extra grain in it for the poor and the migrants, but not every farmer did. Well, God has this provision for taking care of the widow indeed through the Levirate marriage, but not every man did that. Not every man took up that responsibility. But Boaz, and so sometimes Ruth apparently was a young, attractive woman, a Moabitess, yes, but even so, she could have, in disappointing Naomi and throwing out her first marriage and the inheritances that would go with that, just gotten with a man who was more of her age and who desired her, and perhaps was rich, and she could have left that life of Elimelech and all those responsibilities behind. So he says, so you've done a great kindness in that. And by the way, that's this word hesed. You've shown great love. You've made a really great loving choice by coming to me and presenting this to me, because you could have chased after someone more in your age bracket, someone that you had desires for on another level, but instead what you've done is you have tried to fulfill the law of God and the need of your mother-in-law, and you're trying to carry on the story of your deceased husband, and you care for the dead. Want to see that done. So he says, so Boaz is a man of the law, and he's making his decisions based on that. And he says, and you are a woman who's making your decisions, even though you're from Moab, you're making your decisions based on love of the law as well. So, and so this is a great kindness. And here's what he's going to do about it. Verse 11. And now, my daughter, do not fear. There's that line. Sometimes Ruth and Naomi's future has been very much teetering on edge and could go one way or another. So Boaz says, don't fear. The future is in trusted hands. And he says about that, I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Back in chapter 2 and verse 1, when we met Boaz, he was introduced as a worthy man. So we have a worthy man, and we have a worthy woman. And Boaz says, you've already made, even you're from Moab, but you've already made a good impression in our area with your loyalty to Naomi, with your work ethic in coming to my fields, with your behavior, with the choices you have made about not running after men, but carrying on the family line. People have noticed that. And so you are a worthy woman. And in verse 12, and now it is true, he says, that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. That Levirate marriage thing went closest relative, next closest relative, next closest relative. And we've already said Boaz is a man of the law. So he has surely this motivation. We can see in him this inkling of he would like to be the one, but as a man of the law, there's somebody else who has a lawful right to Naomi and Ruth and the inheritances of Elimelech and Chilion and the land that goes with that and the family line and blessings that go with that. There's someone else whose Boaz says is closer than I. And yet Boaz says, this is verse 13, remain tonight and in the morning. So he's going to get right on this. He had spent the night so he could get back to the threshing floor. But he's going to leave the threshing floor. And in the morning, he's going to be setting things right. And Boaz says, if that other relative will redeem you, good, let him do it. That would be the lawful thing. We're following the law here. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. So lie down until morning. Wait. Sometimes you just have to wait and rest. And so Boaz, and really what we have, I mentioned before that Ruth went a little beyond Naomi's instruction. She said, lie there and let Boaz tell you what to do. Well, Ruth lay there, and then when she was noticed, she had made these proposals. And Boaz has responded well and kind to that. So, verse 14, She lay at his feet until morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman has come to the threshing floor. This is that good appearances thing. The book of Romans, chapter 12, says in, I think it's verse 7, verse 17, that we are to provide for things honest in the sight of all people. It's one thing to be honest, but you need to be careful as well that you don't look dishonest while you are honest. So if you need to take some steps to put forth good appearances, then do that. So he said, so let's not have a bad appearance thing happening here by you having sought me out here in the dark at the threshing floor. And here's something that we need to recognize about that. This is just the way of the world. We want to look at the book of Hosea, chapter 9 and verse 1. Now, we're not talking about Boaz and Ruth here. They are worthy, law, Torah, abiding people, of good character and upstanding behavior. But that's not the way everybody is. That other redeemer may not fulfill his obligation. Hosea chapter 9 and verse 1. God is making accusations against Israel for her disobedience. Rejoice not, O Israel, exult not like the peoples, for you have played the whore, forsaking your God. You have loved a prostitute's wages on all the threshing floors. So apparently it was not an uncommon thing for prostitutes during that celebrative time of threshing, when the men were away from home and working hard and drinking at night. It was not unusual for prostitutes to work that area. And that's not what Boaz and Ruth have done. But he said, let's not have anybody even thinking that maybe something like that happened. So you take care when you leave. And then he told her this, verse 15. Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held out a piece of clothing, maybe her headscarf. She held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley, maybe 6 scoops, think about like that. And he put it on her. You know how we talked about backpack kind of thing, or more likely on top of her head. And then she went into the city, so she made the trip back to the city. And verse 16 says, and when she came to her mother-in-law, the mother-in-law said, how did you fare, my daughter? They had had a plan. They had worked the plan. And so Ruth told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now, that's all full of good words, because we might even think this is part of a kind of a simple vow that Boaz had made. He said, I'm going to take care of this. If that other fellow died, I'm going to. And so, you know, in marriages, they had dowries and gifts and that sort of thing. So maybe he's sending this barley to Naomi as a sign. I'm paying up. You know, we're taking care of this situation. And also remember that Naomi, the big word that described Naomi, when she left Moab and came back home to Bethlehem, she said, I've come back empty. Well, here's Boaz saying, don't go empty-handed to Naomi. The Lord's taking care of her and you, and we'll all be in this together. And then in verse 18, so Ruth replied, or Naomi said to her, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So the story is advancing, and we'll see how Boaz takes that on